Question 1. Organizations expanding into new markets must adapt compliance programs to local data privacy laws, e.g., GDPR, CCPA, LGPD. When a U.S. firm begins processing personal data of EU citizens, what is the most critical compliance action to take beyond general policy adaptation? A. Appoint an EU data protection officer and implement data subject rights processes per GDPR. B. Only continue U.S. standard procedures and rely on existing privacy training. C. Encrypt all personal data without updating records of processing activities. D. Limit data transfers to EU countries only, ignoring third-party processors. Correct answer. A. Appoint an EU data protection officer and implement data subject rights processes per GDPR. Explanation. GDPR mandates a DPO when processing large volumes of personal data and requires robust handling of subject access, erasure, portability rights. Relying on US-only policies or encryption doesn't satisfy transparency, accountability, or regulatory compliance. Limiting transfers doesn't exempt processors or rights frameworks. Question 2. When managing U.S. AML/CTF obligations under the Bank Secrecy Act and OFAC sanctions, why is a risk-based approach to due diligence preferred to a one-size-fits-all policy? A. It allows allocation of investigative and monitoring resources to higher-risk entities, balancing effectiveness and compliance cost. B. Because regulators forbid blanket sanction screening. C. It ensures equal treatment for all customers regardless of risk. D. A one-size-fits-all policy is recommended by FATF guidelines. Correct answer. A. It allows allocation of investigative and monitoring resources to higher-risk entities, balancing effectiveness and compliance cost. Explanation. AML/CTF regulations emphasize enhanced due diligence for higher-risk customers, e.g., PEPs, high-volume transactions, not uniform treatment. FATF and U.S. regulators require customizable controls rather than equal scrutiny for all clients. Blanket remediation can waste resources and mask real threats. Question 3. Scenario. Mr. Singh is compliance director at a multinational considering expansion into the Middle East. Their current compliance relies on U.S. FCPA frameworks but lacks due diligence on local agents, gifts, and hospitality policies aligned to regional norms. The firm is concerned about bribery risk. Should Mr. Singh A. Enhance third-party due diligence to evaluate agents, corruption risk, implement gift reporting controls, and conduct training tailored to regional practices. B. Apply U.S.-only compliance standards globally, regardless of local nuances. C. Rely solely on annual general ethics training without targeted content. D. Remove local hospitality allowances entirely to avoid any risk. Correct answer. A. Enhance third-party due diligence to evaluate agents, corruption risk, implement gift reporting controls, and conduct training tailored to regional practices. Explanation. FCPA UK Bribery Act encourage risk-based compliance including localized due diligence, tracking gifts and hospitality, and targeted training, especially where high corruption risk exists. Blanket policies or removal of allowances may be ineffective or impractical. Question 4. When implementing a whistleblower hotline under Dodd-Frank and SOX, why is independence and confidentiality critical to its effectiveness? A. It protects reporters and creates trust, so that misconduct is more likely to be reported. B. It avoids reporting obligation to regulators. C. It ensures all reports are delivered directly to the board, without analysis. D. It limits employee feedback to managers only. Correct answer. A. It protects reporters and creates trust so that misconduct is more likely to be reported. Explanation: incentivized whistleblower provisions in U.S. laws require confidential and independent reporting to ensure legal protection and encourage disclosures. If confidentiality is weak or oversight lacking, employees fear retaliation and systemic issues remain hidden. Question 5. Key risk indicators, KRIs, and key performance indicators, KPIs, both appear on compliance dashboards. Why must KRIs be forward-looking and tied to risk appetite rather than past events? A. To allow proactive risk mitigation before breaches or fines occur. B. Because regulators prohibit lagging compliance metrics. C. Because historical data isn't allowed under GDPR. D. To report compliance, results only in monthly board meetings. Correct answer: A. To allow proactive risk mitigation before breaches or fines occur. Explanation: KRIs tied to risk appetite serve as early warnings. If thresholds are exceeded, investigations can begin before actual compliance failures. Historic metrics like KPIs reflect past performance, but don't forecast upcoming threats. Regulation expects proactive risk control, not just after-the-fact reporting. Question 6. Scenario: Ms. Martinez is a senior compliance officer at a financial institution. Their compliance program includes quarterly internal audit reviews, but no continuous monitoring of transaction data, gift logs, or conflict of interest disclosures. As a result, mid-level deviations go unreported for months and only surface when auditors review. What major improvement should Ms. Martinez propose? A. Implement continuous data analytics to monitor transaction anomalies, gift value thresholds, and conflict disclosures in real time, with alert escalation to compliance. B. Increase quarterly audits to monthly. C. Rely solely on employee self-reporting. D. Integrate audit anomalies only into next annual plan. Correct answer: A. Implement continuous data analytics to monitor transaction anomalies, gift value thresholds, and conflict disclosures in real time, with alert escalation to compliance. Explanation: proactive continuous monitoring aligns with modern compliance frameworks and regulatory expectations, allowing timely detection and escalation. Monthly audits still miss real-time trends. Employee-driven reporting alone is reactive, and deferring resolution delays risk mitigation. Question 7. Why is audit evidence retention and traceability vital when reporting suspected violations to enforcement bodies? A. It provides verifiable support for regulatory engagements and potential enforcement actions. B. It allows whistleblowers to be publicly identified. C. It prevents regulators from ever requesting documents. D. It is primarily for marketing purposes. Correct answer: A. It provides verifiable support for regulatory engagements and potential enforcement actions. Explanation: solidly documented evidence ensures transparency and credibility to regulators like DOJ, SEC, or OFAC. It fosters corrective action and can reduce administrative settlement costs. Public ID of whistleblowers is counter to law. Documentation for marketing is irrelevant. Question 8. When a regulatory breach is patched and root cause identified, what makes an effective corrective action plan? A. It includes ownership, timelines, measurable validation steps, impacts to governance, and monitoring for recurrence. B. It stops at acknowledging the incident and filing a report. C. It delegates follow-up to an unspecified team without deadlines. D. It relies entirely on external vendors. Correct answer: A. It includes ownership, timelines, measurable validation steps, impacts to governance, and monitoring for recurrence. Explanation: best practices under standards like ISO 37001 and SCCE require clear accountability, measurable results, and closed-loop follow-up. Incident response without structure lacks rigor and invites recurrence. Question 9. Scenario: Mr. Anderson is head of compliance for a healthcare firm subject to HIPAA. After detecting unauthorized access in employee records, they notified affected parties and the regulator, but failed to review system access logs fully or assess how privilege was gained. What should Mr. Anderson do to fulfill regulatory and program expectations? A. Conduct a full forensic review. Validate that similar unauthorized access did not occur, and update access monitoring and alerting protocols. B. Close the matter and focus on training only. C. Delegate log review to an external vendor without internal oversight. D. Address only the immediate incident and skip further assessment. Correct answer: A. Conduct a full forensic review, validate that similar unauthorized access did not occur, and update access monitoring and alerting protocols. Explanation: HIPAA expectations require not just reporting incidents, but also ensuring sufficient internal controls to prevent recurrence. Data access logs are critical for understanding scale, method, and to strengthen detection guidance. Training cannot substitute for root cause analysis. Question 10. Global Conduct Rules, FCPA, UK Bribery Act, OECD Convention, emphasize rigorous third-party due diligence. What is the primary rationale behind this requirement? A. Third parties can act as conduits for bribery, so proper vetting and contracting reduce legal exposure. B. Regulators want corporations to manage vendor quality rather than bribery risk. C. Performing vendor due diligence is optional under anti-bribery laws. D. Only domestic third parties pose bribery risk. Correct answer: A. Third parties can act as conduits for bribery, so proper vetting and contracting reduce legal exposure. Explanation: Regulators have repeatedly enforced cases where bribery occurred through intermediaries. Effective compliance requires vetting, monitoring, and contractual anti-bribery controls to avoid indirect violations. Domestic versus international is irrelevant. Risk may exist anywhere. Question 11. Why is having a centralized gifts, entertainment, and hospitality (GEH) register critical under anti-corruption programs? A. It enables visibility and approval oversight to ensure compliance with permissible thresholds. B. It allows employees to bypass approval if the register is full. C. It limits oversight to only executive-level gifts. D. Regulators don't require GEH registers. Correct answer: A. It enables visibility and approval oversight to ensure compliance with permissible thresholds. Explanation: Anti-corruption frameworks require transparency around value and purpose of GEH to assess intent and ensure consistent treatment. Centralized registers support review, aggregation detection, and ease investigation. Option B, C, D misstate compliance needs. Question 12. Scenario: Ms. Lee is compliance officer in an Asia-Pacific subsidiary of a U.S. company. A local distributor routinely gives modest hospitality to procurement staff before contract meetings. There is no written policy on what constitutes permissible hospitality or approval workflows. What must Ms. Lee do to align with FCPA and internal policy standards? A. Define a clear GEH policy with monetary thresholds, approval workflows, and mandatory disclosure in a centralized register. B. Ban all hospitality globally. C. Only allow hospitality for senior executives. D. Leave the current informal practice in place. Correct answer: A. Define a clear GEH policy with monetary thresholds, approval workflows, and mandatory disclosure in a centralized register. Explanation: FCPA and UKBA require transparency and control over hospitality. Permissible practices must be documented with thresholds, approvals, and monitoring. Banning hospitality may not respect cultural norms. Informal chains of influence remain risky. Question 13. Why is it important to refresh anti-bribery risk assessments when entering high-risk jurisdictions or industries? A. Because corruption risk profiles vary by region, and policies must be adjusted per local exposure. B. It satisfies government outreach, but adds no real value. C. Risk assessments are only done at program inception. D. They slow down business expansion. Correct answer. A. Because corruption risk profiles vary by region, and policies must be adjusted per local exposure. Explanation. Regulatory expectations call for dynamic risk assessments tailored to context. High-risk geographies, sectors, partners, or pressure points demand deeper due diligence and appropriate measures. One-time assessments are inadequate. Question 14. What is the key purpose of red flag monitoring in third-party transaction reviews? A. To identify suspicious behaviors such as round-sum payments, unusual routing, or third-party intermediaries. B. To simplify bookkeeping. C. To discourage large contracts. D. To fulfill audit checkboxes. Correct answer. A. To identify suspicious behaviors such as round-sum payments, unusual routing, or third-party intermediaries. Explanation. Red flags help detect potential bribery risk patterns. Per audit frameworks like COSO Fraud Risk Guide and DOJ Voluntary Disclosure Work. Round sums, travel routing inconsistencies, unusual intermediaries, and vendor split payments are classic indicators that warrant escalation. Question 15. Scenario. Mr. O'Brien is Chief Compliance Officer for a manufacturing company in Latin America. A local agent offers to expedite customs clearance for shipments via an official facilitation fee, below USD 100 but paid routinely. No written contract exists for this payment. What is the correct compliance response under FCPA and OECD anti-bribery standards? A. Require the fee to be documented in a written agreement with full transparency and ensure it's accounted for and not disguised, otherwise prohibit it. B. Allow it as long as it's small in amount. C. Ignore it since it's customary. D. Facilitate via internal staff to avoid agent use. Correct answer. A. Require the fee to be documented in a written agreement with full transparency and ensure it's accounted for and not disguised, otherwise prohibit it. Explanation. Under FCPA and OECD guidance, even small facilitation payments must be properly authorized, documented, and recorded. Disguised cash or undocumented fees risk violation. They only remain legal where explicitly permitted and recorded to avoid corruption charges. Question 16. How do anti-corruption audits differ from general financial audits? A. They focus on high-risk activities, red flags, third-party transactions, and grooming evidence related to intent and concealment. B. They use the same sampling design as financial audits. C. They don't require field work. D. They exclude review of contracts. Correct answer. A. They focus on high-risk activities, red flags, third-party transactions, and evidence related to intent and concealment. Explanation. Corruption audits examine contracts, gifts, hospitality logs, decision documentation, and vendor payments, focusing on intent, approval, and documentation, not just numbers. Financial audits validate financial statements. Anti-corruption audits verify controls and evidence where intent may exist. Question 17. Why must compliance training include real-life examples of ethical dilemmas rather than abstract do's-don'ts? A. Real scenarios help employees understand context, apply principles, and learn escalation protocols effectively. B. Abstract rules are sufficient. C. Real-life examples increase legal risk. D. Compliance training is only required annually. Correct answer. A. Real scenarios help employees understand context, apply principles, and learn escalation protocols effectively. Explanation. Case-based training improves retention, critical thinking, and safe escalation behavior. This aligns with ethics maturity models and improves practical understanding of ambiguous situations, unlike generic rule lists. Question 18. Scenario: Ms. Fernandez manages a global compliance team. Her bribery risk matrix shows high exposure in several markets, but the compliance audit logs were last updated 18 months ago. Employees in high-risk regions haven't been retrained, and third-party vetting hasn't been refreshed. What immediate compliance actions should she take? A. Update audit logs. Conduct targeted refresh training in high-risk markets, and revet third-party agents to verify continued compliance. B. Focus on refreshing policy language globally. C. Wait until next scheduled internal audit. D. Lower the risk ratings to reflect no recent incidents. Correct answer. A. Update audit logs, conduct targeted refresh training in high-risk markets, and revet third-party agents to verify continued compliance. Explanation. High-risk exposures require timely follow-up in training, audits, and due diligence. Stale controls and documentation mean undetected compliance gaps. Refreshing policies alone doesn't ensure operational adherence. Ignoring intervals undermines proactive risk management. Question 19. Which of the following best illustrates integration of ethical leadership into compliance governance? A. Board and executives visibly modeling desired behaviors, endorsing speak-up culture, and reviewing ethical KPIs. B. Having a compliance officer solely responsible for ethics. C. Posting code of conduct on the intranet without leadership reinforcement. D. Relying on disciplinary actions only after violations. Correct answer. A. Board and executives visibly modeling desired behaviors, endorsing speak-up culture, and reviewing ethical KPIs. Explanation. Tone at the top is critical. Ethical leadership means leaders demonstrate adherence to policies, encourage transparent reporting, and regularly review compliance metrics, driving genuine culture. The other options promote box-checking or reactive cultures. Question 20. How should escalation protocols for compliance issues be structured under global frameworks, e.g., ISO 19600? A. They should define tiered escalation thresholds tied to incident severity, with clear roles and timelines up to board level. B. Only escalate major breaches to the board. C. Leave escalation at the discretion of local managers. D. Treat all issues the same for simplicity. Correct answer. A. They should define tiered escalation thresholds tied to incident severity, with clear roles and timelines up to board level. Explanation. Standards call for risk-based, tiered escalation frameworks, from local managers for minor issues to senior exec and board oversight for serious or systemic failures. One-size or discretionary approaches can delay critical interventions. Question 21. Scenario: Mr. Ahmed oversees compliance reporting for a global firm. He's noticed underreporting of near-miss events in bribery and conflicts of interest. Employees fear retaliation. What structural change should he implement to increase trust and compliance reporting? A. Introduce a confidential, multi-channel reporting system with anti-retaliation assurance and anonymous complaint recommendation. B. Mandate signed incident disclosures to HR without confidentiality. C. Provide managers discretion to decide which near misses to document. D. Cancel near-miss logs due to low material impact. Correct answer. A. Introduce a confidential, multi-channel reporting system with anti-retaliation assurance and anonymous complaint recommendation. Explanation. Confidential, anonymized channels combined with anti-retaliation protections are proven to encourage internal disclosures. This aligns with regulatory and ethics standards, e.g., Sarbanes-Oxley, EU Whistleblower Directive. Requiring identifiable disclosures or eliminating data hinders detection. Question 22. What is the compliance significance of conducting root cause analysis, RCA, for ethical breaches? A. RCA identifies systemic process weaknesses, enabling corrective measures beyond individual discipline. B. RCA delays disciplinary action. C. RCA focuses only on individual behavior. D. RCA is optional under compliance frameworks. Correct answer. A. RCA identifies systemic process weaknesses, enabling corrective measures beyond individual discipline. Explanation. Ethical breaches often signify process or culture breakdowns. RCA reveals drivers such as compensation incentives, lack of oversight, or inadequate training, allowing structural corrections that reduce recurrence. Individual-focused responses alone miss root causes. Question 23. Scenario. Ms. Jackson is the compliance lead at a tech startup that's rapidly expanding across EU and Asia. Local market teams are handling local variations, GDPR compliance, gift rules, hiring ethics, with inconsistent central oversight. What should she recommend to embed a global oversight, yet locally adaptive compliance governance structure? A. Implement a federated model, centralized policies and oversight with local country compliance liaisons who adapt and enforce within defined parameters. B. Only apply U.S. policies globally. C. Allow each market to self-govern with no central compliance. D. Freeze expansion until compliance harmonization is done. Correct answer. A. Implement a federated model, centralized policies and oversight with local country compliance liaisons who adapt and enforce within defined parameters. Explanation. Federated models support global consistency while enabling local adaptation for legal and cultural requirements. They provide oversight, accountability, and coordination, balancing central control with local agility. Rigid global policies or full decentralization undermine compliance effectiveness. Question 24. Within third-party compliance programs, why is it essential to incorporate periodic ethics certification and compliance attestation for vendors? A. It reinforces accountability, updates vetting as risks evolve, and supports audit trails. B. It's only required under SOX. C. It's a formality with little value. D. It increases risk since vendors might respond poorly. Correct answer. A. It reinforces accountability, updates vetting as risks evolve, and supports audit trails. Explanation. Attestation ensures third parties regularly confirm policy adherence, and fields changing risk aren't overlooked. It creates documented accountability critical for audit and regulatory compliance. It's best practice in modern compliance frameworks, not just procedural compliance. Question 25. Why should compliance metrics include both leading, predictive, and lagging, historical indicators? A. Leading indicators help detect emerging risks proactively. Lagging confirm the impact of past events. Combining both creates holistic oversight. B. Only lagging metrics are required by law. C. Every compliance program can rely solely on leading indicators. D. Leading indicators are not measurable. Correct answer. A. Leading indicators help detect emerging risks proactively. Lagging confirm the impact of past events. Combining both creates holistic oversight. Explanation. Leading indicators, e.g., training participation, policy refresh rate, signal program health. Lagging metrics, incidents, fines, track outcomes. Both are required to meet standards like ISO 37001 and board oversight practices. Relying on only one dimension is incomplete. Question 26. When customizing anti-bribery training for different employee tiers, executives, procurement, sales, what content approach best meets FCPA UK Bribery Act guidelines? A. Role-specific case studies, local legal nuances and escalation reporting, with regular refreshers. B. Identical general training for all staff. C. Only executives receive detailed content. D. Provide training once at hiring. Correct answer. A. Role-specific case studies, local legal nuances and escalation reporting, with regular refreshers. Explanation. Best practices call for tailored content addressing real situations employees face. Procurement staff should know vendor selection risks, sales teams' hospitality thresholds, exec strategic decision risks. Repetition and updates reinforce learning and regulatory expectations. Question 27. Scenario: Mr. Weiss, global head of ethics, discovers that some regional teams pay small, expedited license fees to local officials without documentation or approvals. These payments are outside book and records. Which of the following is required under FCPA and good compliance practice? A. Immediately halt undocumented payments. Investigate, remediate control design. Ensure internal and external reporting where required. B. Continue, as is since the amount is nominal. C. Centralize payment approval retrospectively for the past year only. D. Switch to paying local staff to legitimize payments. Correct answer. A. Immediately halt undocumented payments. Investigate, remediate control design. Ensure internal and external reporting where required. Explanation. Undocumented facilitation payments, even small, can constitute FCPA violations without proper authorization and recording. Good practice requires stopgap action, investigation of bookend record sufficiency, and prevention of recurrence, plus evaluation of whether disclosure is required. Question 28. How does not segregating approval authority for high-value vendor contracts increase the risk of corruption, and what control mitigates this? A. Single-person approval creates undetected influence channels. Mitigating control is mandatory dual approval and periodic vendor master reviews. B. Segregation slows decision-making. One person is better. C. Single sign-off simplifies audit. D. No control is needed if the vendor is well known. Correct answer. A. Single-person approval creates undetected influence channels. Mitigating control is mandatory dual approval and periodic vendor master reviews. Explanation. Segregation prevents unauthorized decisions and conceals bribery potential. Dual approval and periodic vendor master reviews align with internal control frameworks, e.g., COSO, and deter unchecked payments. Question 29. Scenario: Ms. Park, compliance manager in an APAC region, is tasked with revalidating the high-risk third-party vendor list. One vendor has repeatedly increased prices with no contract changes, and their relationship includes relatives of top executives at the client company. How should she proceed to satisfy compliance due diligence? A. Conduct enhanced due diligence. Vendor background checks, request ownership disclosures, evaluate conflict of interest, and consider termination or governance actions. B. Accept price increases as market-driven. C. Shift responsibility to procurement with no compliance oversight. D. Flag but continue business unchanged. Correct answer. A. Conduct enhanced due diligence. Vendor background checks, request ownership disclosures, evaluate conflict of interest, and consider termination or governance actions. Explanation. Signs of potential conflict or self-dealing require immediate attention. Evidence-based due diligence and conflict assessments aligned with FCPA guidance must occur. Options B, D allow risk to persist. Question 30. Under the UK Bribery Act, what concept distinguishes it from the FCPA in controlling corporate criminal liability? A. UKBA has a strict failure to prevent bribery corporate offense absent adequate procedures, whereas FCPA requires proof of direct intent or knowledge by agents. B. The UKBA covers only facilitation payments. C. FCPA has stricter penalties for corporate failure to prevent. D. UKBA exempts small charities. Correct answer. A. UKBA has a strict failure to prevent bribery corporate offense absent adequate procedures, whereas FCPA requires proof of direct intent or knowledge by agents. Explanation. The UK Bribery Act includes a corporate offense for failing to prevent bribery, placing the burden on firms to demonstrate adequate procedures. FCPA relies on intent by agents. This elevates structure and governance in UK jurisdiction programs.